I honestly cannot remember when the change or conversion of heart occurred, but when I was ordained, it'd be 35 years this June, I really didn't think about salary per se, nor did I think about being generous with money, the money I was earning. I don't think it was, and as I reflect on this, I don't think it was out of a conscious selfishness, but rather something of a mentality of obliviousness. I made a salary, not a lot of money as a priest, but we shouldn't really make a lot of money, but it was enough to certainly live well enough and to take care of what I needed. And looking back, it was very much, I now sort of consider to be of an ownership mentality. I owned what I earned, and I spent it basically on myself, or, on gifts and presents and so on, but basically my needs. I was receiving direction from an older priest at the time, and what I consider now to be, by God's grace, all of a sudden one day it struck me like I was having this awakening moment, which I should have had years before, but God is patient, that he was doing all of this for me. He's even flying up to, this is when I was in Powell River, he was flying up to Powell River, and I wasn't giving anything of my finances, financial resources. He wasn't expecting anything personally, but I'm a member of Opus Dei, so he was flying up and he was taking care of my spiritual needs. I asked him about this one day. It's Father Soria, for those who know him. He's a very, very holy man, very generous. He never said a word to me about this, which in retrospect, I wonder why. Maybe he just understood my personality. Maybe it was his personality. But whatever the case, it just occurred to me one day, I kind of woke up and I asked him about this, and he began to tell me how I should be generous with my finances as God was generous with me. Makes perfect sense if you know anything about the Bible. I have to admit that even after our initial conversations, I still had what I consider to be an ownership mentality, but with something of I need to chip in. So it's still an ownership mentality, but a little better I need to chip in attitude rather than a stewardship mentality. If my memory serves correctly, it was when I really came to Corpus Christi that I had what I consider a mind and heart shift conversion regarding my finances, the way I saw the money that I had. And I'm intentionally avoiding the word my money. It was several factors really that converged, but one of them was the stewardship model that we implemented here at Corpus Christi, and this stewardship mentality sort of deepened in my heart. The Archdiocese asked if I was willing to go to this stewardship conference in Florida, and I went. And it really sort of convicted me as I heard all these talks. I went to, I was just soaking them all up. And there was a conviction that I really needed to enter into a stewardship mentality. I began to increase my giving to Project Advance, to the capital campaign, which we were starting. I was just sort of getting off the ground, and to even donating to the parish, which I'd never done before. Now, when I look back, really to my shame. And I was also giving more and more to this fund that supports the apostolic works of members of Opus Dei. So I give to in several different ways. What I've learned from all of this is I pass on to you in the form of a question. Do you see or consider yourself as a steward or an owner of your money? Do you see or consider yourself as a steward or an owner of your money? Money is something very personal to us. It's very intimate. So this is a really personal question, but it has obviously consequences outside of ourselves. In other words, is God thought of first and generously, that is, with a stewardship mentality, or last and when there is leftover? which is an ownership mentality. By his life example, Jesus showed us that he was very much of a steward of everything he had, his resources and his very life. Although this distinction may be lost on a lot of people, it's absolutely critical. Christ was a divine person, but he had a human nature. He had a human body, human mind, and a human soul. But he was a divine person. And that human body, remember in Gethsemane, he said, Father, if there be another way, let it be so. But not my will, but thine be done. He gave everything to his Father. But his human nature experienced the repugnance of giving everything because he knew what that meant. But Jesus said, no, Father, thy will be done. You know I love you totally. Jesus lived in a poor home. His family was anything but wealthy. Wouldn't even be what we would call a middle-income family. Jesus was a carpenter, or more precisely what they call in Greek a tekton, so like an artisan, perhaps even worked with stone, who fulfilled all of the law. So he wasn't making a lot of money, but clearly Jesus would give 10% of all of his resources because that's what God indicated to his children. And not just 10%, but the best and the first, not what remained over. Now, did God need this? No. God doesn't need anything from us. But did they need to give this of themselves? Yes. Because our default with original sin now, it tends not to be generosity, but selfishness. Or I'll give what's left over, and maybe even a little bit more, perhaps if I can look good. But God calls us to a generous heart. And the beauty is, once we do this, we experience what we thought maybe we wouldn't, and that is true joy or happiness. Everything about Jesus was at the disposal of his Father. His love for us was not manifested when it was convenient or when he liked it or when he felt like it. Rather, Jesus' love was a continuous showing forth of stewardship, of his total commitment to his Father, which means also, of course, to us, to me, to you. Every time I look at the crucifix, I think that's Jesus' commitment, not to just all of us, but to me personally. Because he did that for me personally. Yes, all of us, but me personally. His very act of being here, the incarnation, was a manifestation of his love for us. His availability to people, to all people, shows us that everyone mattered to him. The rich, Zacchaeus, but, the poor people, the blind people, for Jesus, it didn't matter. We were all his children. His promise of the Eucharist goes farther and deeper than the incarnation, and that he helps us to become more and more like him as he becomes our very food in order to help us reach eternal life. St. Paul and Barnabas learned this way of living as a steward and not an owner by the way they lived and taught others. Barnabas was a Levite, had property, and he manifested his superabundant generosity by actually selling his property, which for a Jew in that time was like so sacred. It's hard for us to comprehend, but still our property is very personal to us. And he sold that and gave all the proceeds to the apostles. The first Christians were always helping each other, investing in the mission of the church, as Paul and Barnabas and many others went on mission to preach the gospel, to share the good news of Jesus Christ with those who had not heard of it. No one was forced or required to give of their goods. Everyone did so because they really did take the words of Jesus to heart and allowed his words to transform them. There's a real important truth for all of us to kind of reflect on and integrate into our lives. That everything we have is on loan from God. Everything, our very life, our very ability to work, our very ability to get a good salary or get a medium salary, whatever it is. Everything we have is on loan from God. Being a steward is a reality. It's just a reality. And to live any other way is objectively a fantasy. It's kind of like fooling ourselves that I own this. Each of us will see with absolute clarity one day that God has granted us everything we own, And God doesn't mind us saying, I own my house or I own this. But it's, where is that on the scale? Is that number one or is that number two? And God really is the one who allows me to own it. That's really what's sort of in play here. So we'll see that God has granted us everything we own. And he will ask us how we were a steward of the gifts he granted to us. He'll ask for a return on his investment. And he has the right to do this. God has given me so much, money and all things aside. And he'll say, BJ, and this will be like an instant, but I'm protracting it because that's the way we are as human beings. It'll be like, where's my investment? I gave you all of this and it was on loan. Did you invest it? For my purposes, for my kingdom. Think of the power of Jesus' words and living example in today's gospel. We're shown two very powerful realities. Number one, Judas is going to betray Jesus for money, 30 pieces of cheap silver. This man knew the cost of everything and the value of nothing. The value of nothing. And even as soon as he got that money, he felt so disgusted with himself that he threw it away. Satan got a hold of him. We see the consequences of money when it's not used for right purposes, warping somebody's heart. And also Jesus, in the midst of this betrayal, he knows Judas is going to betray him. And he's appealed to Judas in every way whatsoever to win Judas's heart back. Judas goes out, he's made his decision, and Jesus says, knowing full well what's going to happen, and Jesus means this, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as he is not saying this out loud, but he's saying, just as I have tried to love the man who's going to betray me, you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. These words are so profound. They're easy when there's no difficulty in our life. When there's difficulty, you might as well climb Mount Everest on your knees rather than try and live this stuff. But it's possible with grace, with God's grace, maybe some good friendship as well. Jesus shows us the powerful example of lived stewardship. He entrusted his entire life to his Father. So the Lord is both teaching us, as I was taught many years ago by that older priest, who's older than me anyways, that if we are going to be known as disciples of Jesus and not just believers, then we need to love Jesus, or we need to love as Jesus loved us. And frankly, part of that means using our finances with a steward's heart. Jesus was very much aware that he was a steward and not an owner. He was here to do his Father's will. All that I have is the Father's. My will is to do the Father's will. My meat is to do the Father's will. He said this so often to his disciples. This is the way the first Christians lived, and because of it, they had a huge impact on people around them. We hear these teachings about the disciples and the new commandment. At the same time, we should hear ourselves being challenged to ask the question, to pose the question to ourselves. Do I see myself as a disciple of Jesus Christ? Am I just a believer? Or do I see myself as a disciple of Jesus Christ, which means he's my teacher. He's the one who informs my decisions. He's the one I look to for all things in life, as one who is a steward of my resources, of my money. Or do I see myself as an owner of what I have? I know and have experienced the conversion of heart that has given me true happiness, sincere happiness, when I try to live like I'm a steward and not an owner of my money. After that conversation many years ago, I started to give a portion of my monthly check to God, first and not last. And I've never lacked what I needed. I've had to cut back on some things, but so what? It's good for me. And I know this intellectually, but I need to actually tell myself, I need to teach myself, live it out, that you can't take one single thing with you. You know, the words of holy Job should ring in our minds and hearts. Naked I came forth from my mother's womb, and naked I shall go back again. The Lord is given, the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That doesn't mean you give away all your money. But it means, I think about how I'm going to really use it, how I'm going to invest it, not only in my own personal family, in my life, but also invest it in the mission of the church. A conversation with someone changed my way of looking at finances. I began to move from being oblivious to being aware, to a life of awareness, which led me to realize in a new way how generous God was and continues to be with me, and that I really am a steward of all his gifts. And I hope and pray that one day, if I get to see him, that I will be able to say, or at least I'll be able to hear, because I don't think I'll be saying anything. He'll be saying to me like, I never knew you, or good and faithful servant, good and faithful steward, enter into the joy of your master. That's what I really want to hear, and I try to direct my entire life to hearing those words. I began to give more, not because I had to, because we can't fake that for a long time, because I wanted to. I was convicted by his personal love for me. When you go home today, I ask you to prayerfully look at your finances and ask yourself, am I or are we owners of our finances or stewards? Are we trying to be open to the grace of Jesus to be stewards? In the Old Testament, God is very clear about 10%. It was a baseline. What sign can you look for that indicates you are an owner and not a steward, or vice versa? This can be challenging. There's no one complete metric, if you will, but the one metric that comes to me is if I give less than 10%, I might be an owner. If I give 10% or more, I might, and I say might, be a steward. Where is my heart? That's what's really important, is where is my heart before God? Next week, Father Richard will go into some specific steps and ways to help you identify if you are an owner or a steward of your financial resources, and how you can grow an awareness of being a steward.